Listen to KCAA Loma Linda for less confrontation and more information.
Thank you for tuning in for this edition of Justice Watch with Attorney Zulu Ali. I am Attorney Zulu Ali on behalf of the Justice Watch crew, Rosa Nunez, Michael Bilal Clark, and Dr. Akil Bashir. This week, like we do every Sunday, we will talk about important and critical legal issues affecting our communities. Our guest today is Detective Larry Reese. Larry Reese is a police detective with a law enforcement career that spans over 40 years. After attending the Tennessee State Law Enforcement Training Academy, Detective Reese served as a deputy and detective with the Rutherford County Sheriff's Department in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, a civilian police officer with the U.S. Department of Defense Air Force Systems Command, and a police officer and lieutenant detective with the Vanderbilt Police Department in Nashville, Tennessee, before retiring from that post in 2017. Detective Reese attended Middle Tennessee State University in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, where he majored in criminal justice and started his police career as a campus police officer at Middle Tennessee State University while he was in school. Detective Reese is also a graduate of the Tennessee Law Enforcement Training Academy Schools of Basic Police, Drug Investigation, Crime Scene Photography and Processing, and Drug and Criminal Investigations. He's also a graduate of the NFA U.S. Bureau of Justice and University of Tennessee National Forensic Academy in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. He is an original member of the 1994 Nashville Metropolitan Police Domestic Violence Crime Investigations Training Academy, which was established to train investigators to address the growing number of homicides related to domestic violence. He is also a member of the IAI, the International Association for Identification, and the Tennessee Prison Outreach Ministry, involved in mentoring, teaching, and preaching in jail facilities in Davidson County and the state prisons in the Middle Tennessee area. His hobbies include singing, volunteering, and poetry writing. Thank you for joining us today, Detective Reese.
Oh, it's good to be a part of the show today.
Yeah, thank you for calling in. And as we'd spoke quite often about the issues related to the school shootings and school violence and gun control issues and crime. Now, I know that this year, I mean, we're basically about 20-something weeks into the year so far, and there's like an average of maybe one school shooting every week this year, and I think it's involved in maybe like 22 different school shootings. I mean, it's just really just gotten way out of hand, and it's just an issue that it seems that, and I've worked with Detective Reese, by the way, in Tennessee. We both worked for Vanderbilt University Police Department, and the thing about academic policing is that I don't think that people truly understand the significance of crime in an academic setting. And what people also don't understand, a really interesting statistic, is that the majority of youth who experience crime, generally criminal acts take place against youth in schools and not actually on the street. And and also a very interesting statistic is that basically most of the violence against women that happens to them generally happens during their academic years, and actually go unreported because it happens on these campuses. Because it seems like the crimes within the school grounds or within our academic communities tend to go ignored. So I kind of want you to chime in a little bit about the whole issue of crime and kind of where all this violence that we've been experiencing on these campuses. I mean, where do you think that's coming from?
Well, I think that as we review just the U.S. as a whole, and going back to the beginning of mankind when Cain slew Abel, there is that high propensity for mankind to hurt one another. I think that one of the things that I see occurring in the school systems today is that there is a proactive action taking place to be able to address school shootings when they occur. I think that you all have done a wonderful job in pulling up some of the statistics in relationship to, I think there was a 90% increase in public schools, whereby that they have a plan in place and they have been training since 2016 of active shooter situations. But I think where we fall short, Counselor, may be that we are not training our students and we're not really supporting our teachers and the staff and giving them not only the monetary things that they need, but also the things that allow within the facility to be able to educate our students on watching for the warning signs. We're not quite on point just yet to be able to address those issues whereby that each student can see something happening with another student and say, hey, wait a minute, I might need to go and talk to a counselor or a coach or a teacher or a principal to see if we can offset this, whatever's taking place. And then also letting them know that when they see bullying situations or situations where people are having issues with one another, it's not a bad thing to go ahead and try to have that addressed. Unfortunately, given the dynamics of social media and things of this nature, we're not very in tune to being able to have dialogue with one another. I think that texting and all these other things that occur with Facebooking and being able to say something without immediately having to watch a physical expression of someone's response to what you're saying has changed a number of dynamics that allow things to kind of fester and powder up overnight, and then they kind of explode. And so with students having contact with each other's social media sites and things of this nature, I think if they're kind of trained a little more to look at some of the precursors that may offset some of these people that are potentially doing these things, it might help in this situation. And of course, there'll be some other things I know we'll talk about during the show. But as a cursory overview, and kind of in law enforcement and looking at things that have occurred at Vanderbilt and surrounding schools in Davidson County, and even just recently at our Waffle House here, there's another dynamics that come into play where that later people say, oh, yeah, there was something there that I thought I should have said something. And so I think if we can do a little better education, not only having people understand what to do when they're responding to an active shooter, but also watching those behavior patterns that will give you a true indication of maybe we can offset this before it gets to that point.
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, that's kind of one of the things I was looking at and reading about the statistics about the resources that we're actually putting into our criminal justice system, and how, you know, the average amount of money that actually is spent on an inmate in relation to the average amount of money that you're spending on a student is like, you're talking triple and sometimes 5 times more, depending on what state you're talking about. And what I find you know, really interesting about, you know, the way that we're talking about how we're dealing with the school shootings. I know that last night, I think it was last night maybe, or Saturday, when I was looking to see what was on television about the school shooting, you know, I was actually looking at, you know, I guess the wedding with the prince and whatever, you know, of England, and it's kind of like, it's, you know, you have these children and our babies that are getting killed in these schools, but we're not really giving, you know, them that type of attention. And I was, you know, thinking, and I was talking to someone, I think I was even talking to you, where I was saying, look, you know, look at our courts. I mean, how often do you find an active shooter inside of a courthouse? Or how often would you find an active shooter inside of a legislature chambers? It would only take one time if it ever happens, but they obviously are taking the proper precautions because they understand the importance of it. And when you have the appropriate policies in place, you're going to protect those people. And, you know, we have so many different institutions, especially our government institutions, who we don't never see these type of things happening in. So I think that, you know, there's ways of dealing with it. But, I mean, how do you feel about the climate of our country at this point, and maybe the way that we kind of not focusing on the importance of our education and the importance of our children and our teachers? I mean, do you think that maybe it's kind of like the climate of the country that has an impact on it, or how do you feel about that?
Counselor, I believe that you hit the nail on the head in a number of aspects in what you just mentioned. I think it is very sad to say that I guess if we sit down and did a cursory overview of the judicial processes and the legislative chambers and Senate chambers on the state level and the federal level, that we sometimes don't see these things, and then when we do see perpetrators, they're also apprehended prior to things going off. I think it's one of those things, and you've dealt with it too, being in different levels of law enforcement before your law practice, that you see that a lot of times businesses are reactive more so than being proactive. And I had this discussion with a couple of my colleagues at the university in regards to that we don't want our schools to look like prisons, because God knows that a number of them already kind of do in a way the style of which that they are using, the brick and the actual architecture of the buildings. A lot of times they mirror the facilities for incarceration in those counties. I've seen that in like Warren County here in Tennessee, and you'll look at the high school and the same facade, the brick color and everything is also the same of the jail. And I'm saying, wait a minute, that's not a good thing. But I think there are things that we can do from a physical standpoint, i.e. the magnetic locks on the doors, and then having it where that at the initial entry point and the access point to the school, that you're able to make sure everyone comes through that area, and if need be, maybe have wands or metal detectors or things of this nature. Because a lot of times, whenever you have those things that can harden a soft target, it really minimizes the probability of these things happening. And then secondarily, I think that you just have to utilize a lot of the technology that we have, and a lot of people don't want to have big brother mindsets when they go to school, but we do need to have video review of areas where people congregate and have their times away from class and things that they do, because just watching some of the behavior and some of the things that take place, or even witnessing a fight, might allow a person to be able to identify the people that are involved, and then have members of the counseling programs at the university, at the schools, at the universities, and or the principals at these schools, make contacts with these students to start to deflate or do what they can to minimize whatever the issues are. And so I think that, if you kind of have a 4 or 5 prong attack in regards to the school security, these are things that make a difference. But sadly enough, I think we also may have to give strong consideration to the fact that we as adults and we as voting members of society have to just say maybe enough's enough. The time has passed where we need to hold candles and let blooms go and say that they're in our thoughts and prayers. If they're really in our thoughts and prayers, we'll start to really just look at things for what they are. And I guess if you take a review of the turn of the century and how things started to occur in and around these schools, you see that the shootings have always been prevalent in these schools, Counselor. But I think the thing that has been the unique dynamic in this is what I guess I just have to term as attack approach is what I was going to share with you in regards to addressing some of these issues. And TAC, to me, stands for teachers, accessibility, and capacity. I think that if we, as you mentioned before, start to just really put a few more dollars into our school system and our teachers instead of our penal institutions, we may be in a situation where that we can offset some of this and give these teachers an opportunity to see some of these issues before they actually occur. Right. Secondarily, accessibility. If we make it maybe where it's mandatory that if you sell a gun, what has to accompany that gun is a gun lock. It doesn't make sense to me to sell a gun and not have a way to secure it. If we have a baby that's a newborn, before they leave the hospital, we put them in a car seat. If you have kids that ride a bicycle now, before they leave the bike shop, they have to have a bike helmet. What is it that we don't want to stop and just use a lot of common sense practices that might help minimize these things? And then also capacity. We have to just get real with the ability to say, look, we're not going to allow you to have these large capacity magazines on these semi-automatic weapons whereby that you can do all this devastation without reloading. Case in point, our Waffle House shooting that we had here where Mr. Shaw, if you all seen on a lot of the news media, has been described as a hero, and to me in my heart he is, and he did a wonderful job in what he did. And granted, he's such an honest and unique young man that he said, people, I was just trying to save myself, and if I saved others in the process, that's a blessing from God. Right. But the only reason he was able to do what he did and stop the carnage, Counselor, is because the gentleman had to stop and reload. Right. And so what I would like to ask the people in the Senate and the Congress and the House is just stop for a minute. And if you want to be able to address some of these gun issues, just have a tactful approach as it relates to this. Address the teachers, address the accessibility, and address the capacity. And let's just see if that might just start to make a difference, because I know the NRA has got the pockets of majority of them. And we know that everybody's fallen for this thing that they were afraid that when President Obama was in office, they were going to take their gun. But if they truly look at the legislation that he was putting forth, it was just common sense, addressing mental health issues, addressing issues with previous criminal offenses, and also, just the fact that, and I don't want to keep going on here, but you and I, we were raised up in the country. And it's one of those mentalities. My dad told me, Mr. Ali, that basically I think you need to have, at best, 4 guns in your house. You need a shotgun, you need either a 22 or a 308, and you need a pistol, and you may want to have an automatic pistol. But at best, those are the four that should securely be able to allow you to feel comfortable in your house. And also, he was a man of the Depression era, and so he knew what it was like to, as a minority, one, not be able to shop in some grocery stores where food might have actually been if it was very scarce, but you had to be able to feed yourself. Right. So he said these weapons are things that will allow you to be able to have rabbit or whatever you may need to sustain your family. But today you see people, and I talk and have coworkers that might have as many as 120 guns in their home.
Wow.
How can you secure that number of guns? There are small police departments in America that do not have an arsenal with that many guns.
Right.
And so I think we just have to step back and just kind of, understand the Second Amendment and just kind of get real in our thinking. We're not trying to say that anybody needs to necessarily give up their guns, but if you have guns, you have to be in a position where you are accountable and able to secure those.
Right. Right.
I'll pause for rebuttal.
Yeah, yeah. Wow, that was. I mean, you hit it right on the head. I mean, I think that everything that you said, you almost kind of summed up the entire thing with that. And I like that acronym that you use as far as the teachers. I mean, one of the things, and we'll talk about each one of those. I like the way that you broke them up, but the issue that I've always had with like teachers is, the resources that they're giving our teachers and the support that they're giving our teachers, it's just unbelievable. They're not giving them the resources, they're not giving them the training, and a lot of times we're not getting quality teachers because, let's just be honest, I mean, they're not paying the teachers what they deserve. I mean,
Amen.
The teachers deserve to get paid a lot more money than what they're paying, them to do. It's like, you got these individuals that's responsible for taking care of our babies and educating our communities and educating, our country, and we're not giving them the type of support that they deserve and the type of support that we need. And it does, come down a lot of times to money. I mean, these individuals, they get their education, they're really dedicated, and unfortunately coming out of their pockets to pay for paper and paying for things that the school system's not willing to give them and support them. So I'm not saying that we don't have quality teachers. I mean, clearly we do.
Yes, we do.
And the sacrifice that they're making in order to just deal with what they have to deal with. I mean, my hat goes off to educators, and I wish that our society could kind of recognize the importance of the teachers. I mean, just like any other public servant. I mean, law enforcement officers as well, but teachers. I mean, my goodness. I mean, they teach our law enforcement officers. Those are sacred professions and sacred individuals. And I'm always, bothered by the fact that teachers don't get the type of prestige and credibility and support that they really need. And I do think that it would have a significant impact on the way in which things happen in our educational institutions if we didn't give more support to our teachers, both financially and in other ways. And then when you talk about the issue of and one of the things that was really interesting that you spoke about is the social media aspect of it, and the fact that we're not communicating, with our children and not knowing really what's going on with with these kids. We don't know. I mean, and we're raising an entire generation of children who aren't able to communicate with us, and we're not really communicating with them on a level of trying to really understand what's happening and what's going on with them. I mean, we're just living in some really, really, serious and complicated times, and we're feeding our children, so many things. In many ways, we're feeding them a lot of poison.
Yes, sir.
And the climate of the country, the way in which our values, and sometimes we use the word values really loosely, but like you said, I mean, you and I are from the same place, and basically the same era, and we were raised in a way in which respecting ourselves and respecting other people, and having teachers that we looked up to and were mentors, whether it was teachers, football coaches. I mean, that community was so important, and I felt like, school was, not a place that I would go to where I felt that I was fearful and scared. And the fact that, kids have to today go to school scared of other students, and, scared of the teachers and not knowing what's happening. I mean, it's just, it's a mess, And the way that our government is addressing the issue by automatically saying they're going to wanting to give teachers guns, and I mean that's their response, and you don't, and that's, even our own, unfortunately, our own president, that was kind of his response. Hey, we need to give teachers guns. I mean, like, that's really an answer to obviously a deeper problem, So.
Well, scripturally, it always says, if you live by the sword, you may die by the sword. And initially, people in politics, bureaucrats, you understand how they initially look at something and say, well, if the problem's guns, we'll offset it with more guns.
Right.
And it's easy to do that. But, yes, give the teachers weapons, but not guns.
Right.
Give them, like you just said, give them the materials, the time, the money, the space. Allow them to be able to get additional curriculum to allow them to understand behavior patterns, and just go back and make the school that location whereby that our children are comfortable, whereby they're comfortable with communicating with their teachers because they're not stressed, they're not overworked, they're not dealing with financial issues at home that makes it where their home life is when they go, they can't think, they can't really grade the papers and really look at a student in regards to what's happening on paper even, or on the computer, and be able to say, oh, well, this child may have a little issue because they're dealing with so many other issues related to their level of financial status in society and the things that they're going on with. So, to me, I go back, to regress just a minute, I go back to like 1991, I believe it was. And, Counselor, I decided, I had a gentleman that I was doing an interview in for a series of burglaries. And in the interview, I realized that his educational capacity was just not there. And so I felt really uncomfortable with going on. And even though he had waived his rights and he was wanting to have a discussion, I asked him, I said, well, we're going to stop this now until you have an opportunity to talk to someone. And I asked him after we turned off the recorder, I said, can you mind sharing with me what is your educational level? And he said, well, I got to the 8th grade, but really I think I probably read at about a 4th or 5th grade level. And I actually could see that as he was looking at the admonition and waiver and looking over the things, and I'm reading it to him. And how people turn their head and you see those nonverbals where they're not quite getting it. And so from that time, I would just start to ask that question whenever I'd have a suspect that I was working with. I said, ma'am, sir, do you mind telling me what is your educational level? And pretty much on average, it was about an 8th grade level. To me, foundationally across the nation, if we would just start to focus on our educational system and stop pouring all this money into these correctional facilities and all these other law enforcement entities, and allow the nation to be able to increase their educational level, to me there's a direct relationship between criminal offenses and the educational level of those that are committing those offenses. Now, granted, we're talking about those that put the higher number of people behind bars and incarcerate the higher number of people. That relates to their educational level. You're always going to have the white-collar crimes and some of these other things, and embezzlement and some of those other things that are related to people of higher educational level. But overall, across the board, I think foundationally, if we could start there, we would be able to find the ability to use a little tack, at TAC again, and be able to address these things to just bring some of these shootings down, bring some of these emotional explosions down, and then also we have to just be true about trying to remove the ability for them to have these weapons of mass carnage at their disposal.
Right.
When the Second Amendment was done, I mean, we're talking about, you got to take the ball and put it in the rifle and shove it down and do all. The forefathers, not in their wildest dreams, ever thought that there would probably be a time where we could have weapons like we have today.
Right.
And truly, it's nice and it's good to say, hey, I have an AK-47 or AR-15 or whatever it is. But let's just be true, people. Those are weapons of war.
Right.
True?
Right, absolutely.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, those are weapons for soldiers.
Right.
And I believe that, if you're comfortable in having one and you're able to secure it, and this is America and you have that freedom, that's okay. But let's not get this mindset that every third house needs to be armed more than any militia, anything that might be in Haiti or some of these other countries. It doesn't make sense to me. So you're creating a situation where if someone breaks in your house and they're able to get their hands on those things, they have the ability to go out and create carnage and or sell those things to secondarily people that may get into the hands of students or people of this nature that can do some of these things. So we have to just step back just for a minute and say, okay, we're going to use possibly a little tact, a little common sense, and to be able to address this. Right. And I'll pause for.
Yeah, one of the things, I hear about.
Your response.
I hear about the gun control. I hear about arming the teachers, but I want to go down to the root of the problem because I deal with youth. In my program, I deal with youth. And, looking at this Washington Post statistics saying that 152, shootings since 1966, I mean, it's a serious issue. I mean, and in my youth program, while dealing with the youth, I have an opportunity to, kind of navigate their minds by doing one-on-ones with them. And one of the things that I do with them in one of the group settings is I do what they call a bag of questions, where you put a question inside of a bag and you don't know who it is that put the question in, but we kind of shake the bag up and we pull the questions out and then, the person asks the question. And I remember one session, we had 3 suicides. I want to kill myself. And I think that we're missing a point because we need to deal with our youth. Yeah. Our youth are so, they're like silent. We ignore them. We ignore their calls for help. Mm-hmm. And, recently I was looking at Fox News, who actually did a report on basically, a lot of the school shootings where they were saying that a lot of the kids was on antidepressants and stuff. Well, what creates this? Mm-hmm. What creates this is these kids go to school and they get bullied and, and then that leads to them being, a loner, they be depressed, and the parents don't, sit down with them and talk to them. There's no counselor at school. The only time the counselors show up is when a school shooting happened. So after the fact, they showed up after the fact. Yeah. You see what I'm saying? So these kids have all these different problems and all these different issues that have not been dealt with. And so, they have these suicidal tendency because they come to school every day. But they saying 160,000 kids miss school every single day because of bullying. Wow. So I think that the real issue is that we need to focus more on our youth and find out what's going on through their head, because then what happens is we'll stop this problem before it happens if we have those school counselors taking in consideration that these kids is going through bullying, sitting down and counseling them before the fact rather than after the fact.
Yes, sir. Yeah. I think you hit the nail on the head in regards to that. And as I talk about the TAC program, and when I say teachers, I include that into the counselors and all those people that are involved in the medical aspects of the cure of the children, and also, those programs. And you look across the nation, that you have those programs where they're cutting out the band, they're cutting out certain sports, they're cutting out a lot of things that are instructional entities that allow people to understand the importance of working together for a common goal. And then we want to look up and go, well, why is this all happening? Because we don't have an opportunity to allow our children to be able to know what it's like to have a dependence on another person sitting across from me for us to be able to achieve a nice melody about what we may be doing in music, or being able to achieve the positive results from a football play or a basketball play or a tennis event or just whatever it may be. Those things we have to look at and say, okay, we need this kind of funding where they don't have to worry about those things going away. Or even from the standpoint of just in our art, having the ability to have them be able to be expressionary on a canvas more so than with a gun. Right. And so, to me, I don't know, and it may sound kind of weird coming from a career law enforcement person, but there are times that I wish that, and they say first and foremost that, infrastructure, you have to get more police, more fire, all these things. But a lot of times my prayer at night when I go to bed is, even here in Nashville, they just announced that the teachers are not getting a raise, the police are not getting a raise, there's a shortage of funding on the taxes because there was a mistake in the actual number of houses or whatever that were being sold and the income that would come from the property taxes. But it's really sad because I would much rather still see them find a way to support our teachers. That has got to happen. You hit the nail on the head. If we don't, because, when we look at it, and I don't know the numbers, and y'all might have those anecdotal numbers, but the kids in school probably spend the bulk of their time in the school system from the age of 7 until 16 than they do probably any place else in their lifespan during that time, either involved in the actual classwork or after-school activities, or be it ball games or whatever it may be. And so our systems have just got to be back on track to where that I know when I was a child, I had so many opportunities, be it things after school with biology experiments, just social experiments, just doing things in the community, band, whatever it may be. And those are the things that allow a student to become well-rounded and also understand what it's like to make a comment and see a non-verbal response from that person that you're making it about sitting across from you. Because when I make a comment on social media, on a computer, or on a text, I don't see that. I don't understand the impact of how it may impact this person in which I'm speaking of. And so then it just continues to go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And it doesn't allow for an overnight period of just decompression, because your phone buzz, you pick it up, and Nancy has said something about Jane. Right. And then Jane responds, and then Sue says something back, and then Sue sends it to Nancy. And so we have to find a way to allow our children to get back to, that prima facie, as they say, based on the face, being able to see one another and being able to see exactly what one another is saying based on the face of what is really there and what they're saying. And I'm hoping we can work and just really support these programs like you mentioned, and support our kids in such a way that they know that I don't have to worry about trying to go to a guidance counselor but not being able to get in today because they have too many people ahead of me, and I may have to wait till the end of the week. Right. There's plenty of staff available. There are plenty of avenues for support. And that's what I hope that we will eventually get to as we try to just rectify some of these issues that are related to our school and our students.
Right.
Yeah, and honestly, I think that it's truly very true that we need to address, our youth today and pay close attention to them, because as a recent college grad and a sister to two high school students who are currently growing up in a low-income community, we can see we're growing in a negative culture, and we can see it in the way the media portrays the shootings and the aftermaths. They kind of tend to glamorize the shooter, they kind of tend to pay close attention to how many people were killed, how many people were shot, where were they shot from or whatnot, the race, their ethnicity, their background, their family, and everything. And they tend to desensitize the suffering of the victims. We rarely have the stories of the families of the victims who are suffering and how they're kind of coping with the suffering of losing a child at a school. And even when we have students like in the Florida shooting, we had a lot of students who kind of rose up and tried to protest and address the issues of how scared they are and how it's affecting their education. We rarely have the media addressing them. We kind of have them in a negative picture, portraying them as they're too young to kind of speak. They're too young to have a voice. They don't know what they're talking about in a way. And I feel like, yeah, it's true. We need to really address our youth because, they're the future of tomorrow. They're our tomorrow. And if we're really not paying close attention to them and what they're screaming out, with their voices, with their protesting, with everything that they're doing to educate themselves, then who's to say that the day of tomorrow, we're not going to have more shootings. And not only in schools, but everywhere else. And we are already seeing it.
Yes, we have.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that one of the things that's interesting about, what you're talking about, both Bilal as well as Rosa, first with the issue of, having, when we were growing up, there was really no competition. I mean, as far as who's in your ear as a child. I mean, basically, other than basically school, once you leave school or practice and you come home, from that evening to the next day, whether you're sitting around eating, dinner or whatever, you're pretty much, your parents have your ear. And there was really nobody else in your ear. And now you got social media and you got people who are 12, 13 years old that's got 1,000 friends on Facebook. I mean, who's got 1,000 friends? I mean, I'm 50-something years old and I don't even have 1,000 friends. I don't believe. And so you got that competition. So as a parent, you have a challenge that maybe parents didn't have before, because you really didn't have to compete with who had your child's ear, who has your child's attention, and that creates and you didn't have no the skills that it takes now in order for you to deal with. It's like, my grandkids. I mean, they're 2 years old and 4 years old, and they got devices in their hand. You know what I mean? So that's how we keep their attention. So they don't, so that they won't do anything wrong. We give them this little device so they can sit there and play and leave us alone. You know what I mean? And so that's, you know, and that's kind of like our way of kind of comforting them. But also another thing that has happened that, you know, people sometimes are being really, I know that there's kids now, at least here in California, detective, that, and I don't know if that's happening, you know, in Tennessee, but I know here there's a lot of children that are starting to get in a lot of trouble for things that they're putting on social media. And I know that there was one instance where I had a kid that basically was on the social media. I don't remember what it was. It was one of them. It wasn't Facebook. It was something else where he was giving this narrative. And what the narrative came from was something that apparently he was in school and saw a teacher lose it, literally where she had to be removed. And so what they did is they were like, you know, putting that narrative there and using the words that the teacher was using. And then some officer from some Midwest police department saw it, called the local police, and had my kid arrested. Now, he was a stellar student, you know, making straight A's, wanting to become a physician, and now they wanted to expel him, you know, because of this, of what was said. And you know, so you're punishing the kid, and nobody said one, and I'm glad something that you said, you know, it all comes together. What you were talking about with kids and not having counselors, what you were saying about people not listening to what people are talking about, as well as what you were talking about, Detective Reese. They did not one time, and I'm just thinking about this right now, not one time did somebody say, hey, is this kid having a problem about what he saw his teacher do? He, you know, it was on video that some kid had videotaped this teacher losing it because they were having issues. So, you know, maybe that's what this kid needed. He needed someone to give him a little bit of attention, but instead they were contemplating prosecuting him for making criminal threats. And you see what I mean? I mean, and so that's kind of where we've gone, you know, where we've almost aren't even dialoguing or human with people. People nowadays, they rush to judgment. They don't think about what's happening. And the entire conversation, not once, is like, you know, this kid is 18. He's a senior. And now something is wrong because he's never been in trouble a day in his life. So why don't we take the time? And so now what you're doing, what if now you've taken that particular kid who's never got in trouble a day in his life, who did what he allegedly did and nobody paid attention to him, is that our next shooter?
Yeah.
Yep.
And see, and look, let me tell you, and that's a trip that you say that is because, you know, I had these two young lady youth, and their mother was in truancy court, and they wanted to lock the mother up because the kids wasn't going to school. So they tried to find out why the kids wasn't going to school. So the mother kept telling them, look, they would leave outside the house, but they would never go. Come to find out that the kids were living in a motel room and didn't have any breakfast half of the time. And then when they get to school, their hair is all messy and kids bully them. And the times that they didn't go to school, they was going over to a friend's house and sleep because they were tired, because because the boyfriend was coming in late at night, having parties late at night. So these kids would go to school, and when they did go to school, they would get suspended because they'd get into a fight with another kid because they teased them about the clothes that they were wearing because they was dressed coming out of a motel room every single morning, not being fed. And like I'm saying, a lot of times is that a lot of teachers miss the point. Like I think you said earlier, Mr. Reese, that one of the things that we have to do is start to read the early signs. Yes, you know, seeing what kids are going through, find out what kids are going through, take them, pull them to the side. And a teacher, look at the teacher. The teacher got 15, 20, 26, 30 kids in the class, and they can't pull one to the side just to do a one-on-one with them and find out what's going on in their head. I'm telling you, the root of all of this is going back to finding out what's going on with the youth. You know, how many suicides we had on Facebook Live within the last 2 years? This is ridiculous, you know?
It is. It is. And also the fact that we're not, I mean, the kind of the way that we And you're right. I mean, sometimes they're calling out. You know, like the protest. I mean, that they had where the children got together. You know, you did have some. They got together and they started trying to criticize them for what they're doing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Trying to
that's
say,
bad.
like, you need to shut up, and you know, and we're not paying attention to what's going on. I mean, so there's just so much going on with the kids, and we're not really paying attention to a lot of times what's happening, because we immediately say he's a bad kid. You know, and I'm a true believer that there's not really, especially when you're talking about really small kids, there's not really bad kids. There's something, and we kind of like say, okay, this is the good kid and this is the bad kid. He's just a bad seed. And then we kind of, and people tend to morph into what you define them to be, you know. And then when you do that, you know, and you're at such a very, you know, critical stage, and you know, delicate, and like the kid, and honestly, this is the first time I really thought about it, listening to you and listening to, you know, Rosa and Bilal. You know, this kid could be that way, because I mean, his life is shot. In his mind. He's like, I want to be a physician. I made this one mistake, and instead of someone, you know, the parents are mad at the school is mad at the kid. Everybody's worried about maybe even the, you know, the legal aspect of maybe what I mean, and everybody, not one time did I ever hear someone say, you know what, maybe we should send this kid to counseling and figure out what's going on with him, because there's something, you know, we're making him out of something that it shouldn't be. I mean, because nobody paid attention to it. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
And I think that's happening way too much, and we're not really, you know, and it used to be a time where, you know, like when I was a kid, I mean, all I needed was a switch. You know what I mean?
I told to go get one.
You know, but you know,
I told to go get it.
yeah, you got to go walk and get
The
it.
little one.
Yeah, you better not get no little one, right? You know. But it's just so much more complicated, and we kind of like we want to just you know, excuse the youth right now and say basically it's the time, they're spoiled, they don't want to listen, we didn't do these things, they're not paying attention. But I mean, I just think that there's a lot more to it, and I think that as parents and as educators and people who are concerned about our youth, we do have to begin to start figuring out ways that we can, you know, deal with, because there's people out there that's going after these kids. I mean, they're a market, and you can reach them in a way. I mean, before, I mean, nobody, you know, unless you talk to my parents, my mother, my grandma, something like that, you're not really going to talk to me. Once I get out of school and I go home, you're not really going anywhere, you know, unless you get that big old phone that you got, the one that you used to have to dial and used to get in trouble if you stay on it for too long. But now, you know, they even got cell phones. Kids have cell phones. They have computers. I mean, and you know, all these individuals, and they're trying to sell them something. They're trying to indoctrinate them so they can market things to them. Just like when you talked about the high capacity magazine weapons. I mean, there's nobody that should be that scared. I was in the Marine Corps, and there's people that's got more firepower than I had when I was in the military. You was talking about the armory, you know, Detective Reese, and you're talking about the you know, that you got civilians with, you know, with weapons with more capacity than local law enforcement. I mean, and that's what I mean, it's amazing that, you know, that is their the fact that you got kids getting killed at school, your immediate response is they're trying to attack our Second Amendment rights.
Yeah, that's absurd. Absurd to me.
And you know, another thing is that, you know, when a youth go through a lot of bullying and stuff like that, you know, they become depressed. You know, they don't sleep at night. They play the video games, which you know, the video games take them into this, you know, this non-realistic world, and they can shoot everything up. You know, and the parents don't listen to it. You know, they stay up late, so they end up putting them on these antidepressants. And believe me, everybody know that whenever you put anyone on a medication, it has 1,001 side effects.
Yes,
you know,
sir.
so I can understand when they did that study about, you know, the great majority of the kids who actually, you know, did the school shootings, you know, they was on some type of antidepressant, whether it was Prozac, Meloril, whatever it was. And when you look at the side effects of some of these drugs, man, look at here. I mean, look, you're trying to correct one problem, but you got another 1,001 problems that come with the medication. You know?
Right. Yeah.
And I think a lot of times with the medication, we fail to realize that there is a physical support mechanism. I mean, it's almost like that in any type of medical treatment that we have. I mean, if you just take something for the common flu, even though you take something, there's other physical support mechanisms that have to take place in regards to making sure you have enough fluids, you know, making sure that you're cool, you know, all these other things that someone else will have to have interaction with that person in order to make sure everything comes and be facilitated to the best interest of that person. But a lot of times we want to just give them a pill, and that's the fix-all, and then we don't spend enough of that time emotionally, physically, you know, psychologically with that person to help them get through whatever they're working through. So that helps with them maybe being able to start to cope, but we also have to give them just that human attention whereby that they can have that communication skill, understand how to just, you know, decompress, be able to talk about issues, be comfortable who they're talking to. I know you mentioned having the counselors and really finding out, and I just appreciate, I love that program you mentioned where they put the things in the bag and they all pull them out and then they discuss them. You have to give them that ability to be able to be comfortable with who they're talking to and be able to be open and be able to just be trusting to just share that information, because that's the tough thing with our young adults and younger ones today is they just don't have that level of trust. But one reason is because the people they want to turn to and trust, they just don't have enough time because they're having to do too many other things that's really out of their preview, but they have to do it in order to get things done. And so I'm hoping that, you know, eventually we will just really come to understand that there may be some things that we have to give up in order to give up that probability of someone losing their life. And if it means that I may have to pay a little more when I buy a weapon, that weapon comes out of that shop with a gun trigger mechanism lock on it, or that I can't have these high-capacity magazines, that I have to be in a building to maybe pay a few more taxes where I can have my teachers be comfortable and have the number of teachers where that ratio is not 1 to 30, that it's more like 1 to 10 or 11, whereby they can really, you know, give them the attention and also be able to see some of these nonverbals and these other things that really tell the story. I mean, you know, Counselor, you do that, you know, with your constituents and also those that you're representing, that when you're having just an interview, you can see those nonverbals that really tell you the story more so than what's coming out of their mouth.
Right.
And so if you don't have an opportunity to be able to sit down and really watch those things as you're having dialogue with someone, you miss so much. And then once again, we're standing on the street with candles in our hands, letting balloons go, having our people in Washington say, well, we pray for you, you're in our prayers, our thoughts, you know, and it's just not right.
Yeah.
We've got to really just get serious and get real about this and just say, hey, we can do this.
Yeah.
I just love and have the greatest respect for the First Lady, and I pray that her recovery goes well. And I know recently she just started a Be Best program, and I would just almost love to see her take that to another level and just say the second tier of this is just be love. At the end of the day, if we could just be love, a lot of this will start to work its way out.
Right. And what's great, I mean, and I like the way that your analysis and you know, I think you said teacher accessibility and capacity, is that whenever someone tries to address the issue, it's always like, you know, it's one thing or the other. You know, we don't really want to, you know, it's obviously it's going to take more than just one issue. I mean, as we discussed here, we're talking about several things that we have to address in order to, you know, somehow, you know, solve it. And you know, I know that I'm an impatient person, I guess, by nature. I'm not really the type of person, when I see that there's a critical, I don't think that there should be any, I mean, I know that everybody has their own opinion, and I respect everybody's opinion. But when it comes to our children and it comes to our babies, I have a very low threshold a very low threshold of patience, because I don't think, what are you waiting for? You know, I think that what I would like to see is for us to do something immediately. There's no reason why that, you know, considering the fact that we're having so many of these school shootings, that there could, you know, there should be, this is like reacting to a war.
Exactly.
Yes, sir.
You know, I mean, we should respond to it with that type of speed and say, you know, this is something that we're not going to tolerate. We're going to immediately figure out a way that we're going to solve the problem to make sure that when our children go to school, they're going to go to school safe. Because if you're going to live in a nation where your children, you can't be able to send your children to school where you feel safe, and your children don't feel safe, then what are we doing? I mean, if you're talking about respecting our values, respecting our flag, respecting those who fight for our country, that's what you need to do. That's what that's what I call disrespect. Is that when you don't want to respond in a way that will at the very least protect our children, then that's very troubling to me, and and that's where we need to protect our next generation and do the things that we need to do to make sure that these individuals are being educated, because that's our future. If we're not being able to educate our babies, then we're in trouble, man. I mean, what are we doing all of this for? What did we fight for? What are we sacrificing everything for if we can't protect our babies? Because that's really what it's about. It's about the next generation, and hopefully our disagreements. I mean, we're at a point now, unfortunately, where we can't even dialogue with each other without fighting with each other or shooting with each other. They're playing out the things that we do as adults. We can't get along with each other. We can't communicate cross-culturally. Why can't we respect each other? We can respect each other's. We're at a time in period where we're at a critical point in time in our country. If we don't begin to start changing, and I love you using the word love, and start trying to have love for each other and get along with each other, and stop trying to hate people because of race, color, religion, and all that kind of stuff, we're just going to destroy ourselves. I mean, what are we going to do? Just get a bunch of guns and start killing each other over something that's superficial? And that it's just getting out of hands, and I just hope that we start changing it, and that we'll immediately start implementing some of these things.
I think you hit the nail on the head, and it just takes me back to that song that we might all know. I think George Benson did it, and it said that I believe the children are the future. Teach them well and let them lead the way.
Right.
Show them all the beauty they possess inside.
That's right.
Give them that sense of pride to make it easier. Let the children's laughter remind us all how it needs to be.
Right.
So, until we get to that point, Zeus, I don't know, bro.
I'm telling you, we have to.
And I think I think if any message I can actually put out there is that we need to pay more close attention and listen to our children. Sometimes I'm guilty of it. I run so much, I see them on the phone, or I see them on computer and stuff. But I think, even when I run across something that I don't see or I don't like, instead of me just smashing my kids, I just say, I educate them on why not to do this, or why this is inappropriate. Don't look at this or don't look at that. But I think that whenever we sit our kids in front of the computer and we don't censor it, they will sit there and they will believe everything that they read. Because I ran into it with my son. And he come in, I'm like, where did you get that from? Internet. He got it from internet. And so I had to sit him down and explain to this why this is incorrect. But I think with parents now, they on the grind so much, and they don't have that time. They come, they cook that quick meal, give it to them, let them go back to their phone or their computer. And then what happens is they believe everything they read, And I often think about, the kids real quick, the kids who actually go through that bullying phase and stuff, and they go back and they play these video games, and then they fantasize, well, okay, if I'm going to go out like this. At least I know how to go out because this video game that taught me that. They live in this world that is unrealistic.
Right.
Man, so.
Yeah, so impressionable. Well, Detective...
Well, I appreciate you all allowing me to have some dialogue with you all, and I'll share something with you really quickly, that the Benton, Kentucky shooting we had back on January the 23rd, a number of those victims came to the Vanderbilt Medical Center because of Trauma One in this area. And I had an opportunity to meet some of the parents and also pray with them as their kids were in surgery. And then one of the families, each time the young man comes back for just to be checked up again, they'll bring him by and visit with me. And I remember that it was just so enlightening because at one of his follow-up visits, his mother said, I think he will be okay just as long as we don't have something like this happen again, because emotionally he was kind of on pins and needles. And it was that very evening that he was at the hospital getting that follow-up.
Okay.
That evening, February the 14th, is when they had the Parkland shooting.
All right.
And
Well,
so it's one of those things where that I just hope we can continue to be mindful, be in prayer, but also be supportive of these parents that have to tell and talk to the victims of a number of these incidents to be able to keep them in check where emotionally they do not just spin off into outer space on
Okay.
stuff.
all right. Well, thank you for joining us, brother. I appreciate
Your
it.
NBC Sports Radio update starts now.
Keeping it close, I'm Jeff Nathanson. That's what the Houston Rockets are trying to do late in the second period of their road game against the Golden State Warriors. It's 53-41. Golden State just 28 seconds to go until halftime. The Rockets had it down to a 7-point deficit a few minutes ago, but right now they're down 53-41. Still the second half to go. In the first half, Kevin Durant, 13 points in this game.